Over 10 years ago, I used to live in a peninsula in Norway. It was quite idyllic actually, as we, me, my sister and my mum, lived within walking distance of a beach. We had a short and incredibly narrow driveway that led to the house, and the only window in the house facing the driveway was my bedroom window. This is important for later. I was about 9 or 10 at the time when the incident happened. I was in the living room watching a show on Jetix. I think it was around 6 to 7 PM, as it got pretty dark fast at that time of year, which was January. I had been sitting there for hours when my mother told me to go to my bedroom and watch TV, as we were having guests soon. I grabbed my things and went inside my room. I remember the room felt really cold, so I turned on the heater and went back out to the living room to get my candy or something like that. On my way out the door, a sudden feeling of dread washed over me, and I had this feeling that someone had been watching me. I don't know how to explain this feeling, but it was as if I subconsciously could see someone outside my window from the corner of my eye, but not realize it until I grabbed the door handle. I turned around quickly and glanced at the window. Nothing. I felt really stupid and brushed it off as me just being paranoid or dramatic. I got my candy and went back into my room. The first thing I noticed was that my bedroom window had been slightly opened, and I didn't remember opening it. I figured maybe my mum did it. Suddenly I heard a sort of scratching sound outside my window, and this time I froze still. I couldn't process what was going on. There was a person outside my window. His face was glued to the glass, and he was holding his hands on each side to get a better look inside my room. As my window was quite far up when standing outside, I could only see his head. For a brief second, I thought maybe he was one of the guests that my mum was talking about, but I had never seen him in my entire life. He was just staring at me. I couldn't move, or maybe I could, but I didn't want to. I was too scared. He looked like he was in his 40s, and I remember him having really dark circles under his eyes. He just stood there for what felt like an eternity, and then suddenly widened his eyes and continued to stare. This scared the crap out of me, and I managed to shout, "Mum!" The man panicked and disappeared quickly. As I was in the middle of telling my mum that this man was standing outside my window, our doorbell rang. My mum answered the door and wouldn't let me out into the hallway to see who it was. I just remember her looking uneasy when she came back. A few months later, the same man was arrested and charged with murder after his neighbours complained about a horrific smell coming from his apartment. The police discovered the decomposing body of a 13-year-old girl in the attic who had been murdered by him. She was last seen in her bedroom and had been missing for several days. After all these years, my mum told me what the man said at the door. He told her that someone had ordered takeout, and he wanted to check if it was the right address. This being a small peninsula, she recognised him from a small vegetable shop and realised he was lying. She got scared and quickly told him no one had ordered anything. A year later we moved to the city, and only now I fully understand why. I truly believe that if my mum had not been there, I would not be alive today. Sometimes I feel guilty for the girl's death, and wonder if she would be alive and well today if I had been taken instead. This particular event happened almost a year ago, sometime in mid-October. A couple friends and I drove out to visit an old friend of ours from high school, George, who now lived about an hour out of the city. We spent the whole day with him, and it was really late when we finally decided to start the drive back home. My friend Lisa was passed out in the passenger seat. She had had a few drinks and decided to spend the ride home asleep. My other friend Sam was sitting in the back seat behind Lisa and was playing a game on her smartphone. I, of course, was driving. I was following the GPS's instructions back to the freeway. At that moment we were driving down a dark street with thick trees bordering both sides. Everything was pretty peaceful, with the only sounds I could hear being that of the car moving along the road, and the radio on low volume. Suddenly my car let out a loud jolt, and it felt as if I had hit something. Sam let out a shocked scream while Lisa remained dead asleep. I slammed on the brakes and the car came to a halt. I was breathing heavily when I asked what the hell had just happened. Sam peered through the back window and gasped. She turned to me with an angry look on her face and shouted that I had just hit a dog. I looked through the back window and sure enough, a dog was lying on the road a few yards behind the car. Sam is a pretty big animal lover, so I wasn't surprised to see her get pissed at me. She was about to open her door and rush to the animal's aid when I stopped her. Once I had gotten over the shock of running over a dog, I got a feeling in my gut that told me something was off. I'm no braggart, but I consider myself to be a very attentive and safe driver. My eyes were on the road at all times, and I distinctly remember not seeing any dog in the road prior to the car jolting. Yes, it was dark, but I was sure that I would have at least seen the dog in the headlights before hitting it. I looked through the back window and took a closer look at the dog, or at least as much as I could make out in the reddish light coming from my taillights. It was a fairly big dog, at least a golden retriever or something like that. But one particular detail caught my attention. I could see the dog's tail wagging. Now, I'm no expert on the mannerisms of animals, but I was sure the last thing a dog would do after being hit by a car would be to wag its tail. After a moment of thought, I pressed my foot down on the accelerator and sped off. Sam snapped at me and ordered me to go back, but I told her that something was wrong with the whole situation. She continued to argue, but she fell silent as she turned back towards the back window. She asked, "What the heck?" with a shaken voice. I looked in the rearview mirror. Though it was dark, I was able to make out the silhouettes of 3 large figures emerging from the trees on the side of the road. The dog was now up on its feet and jumping around joyfully. The 3 figures looked in our direction as I pressed my foot down on the gas harder and sped off. Sam and I remained silent for the rest of the ride home. It wasn't until a few days later that we told Lisa about it. We've been back to visit George a few times since then, but we always make sure to leave before sunset. Still, I dread to think about what would have happened if we had gotten out of the car. I have always had an innate fear of the night. Not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that come alive at night, and the safety offered by a house and light. I never had anything to base this fear on until a night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game and got stuck at a light at 2 AM after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night the game went into extra innings, and so I didn't get a chance to drop my friend off back home until well after 1 AM. Everything was fine on the way home until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It was a T-junction and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken until it finally turns green right when you finally decide to just run it. Of course, I pulled up right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light seeing as no one was there, and it was closing in on 2 AM on a school night. But earlier this week I had heard the phrase, "Character is what you do when no one is looking." And for whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove to myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light feeling good about myself, bordering on self-righteous, when I happened to look out my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We made brief eye contact, and I quickly looked away, but it was too late. I could see movement out of my peripheral vision and knew she was coming my way. I looked out the window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that all my doors were locked and all my windows were up. I then moved my right foot above the accelerator just in case and braced myself for what was to come. I was hoping it would be just an awkward exchange and was praying for a quick light change before she reached me so I could just get out of there, but I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walked right up to my window, put down her bag and began to tap on my window. I nervously looked up at her and she motioned for me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on the window button and that thing just coming all the way down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She then leaned in and began to talk. She said, "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" I should stop and give a brief physical description of the bag lady. She was small and skinny and of indeterminate age. She was either in her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20+ years on the street, or she was a 60-something-year-old who had lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, There was no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not just by a boyfriend. But there was something about her delivery. It was robotic and seemed practiced, and like she was disconnected from the moment. That made my skin crawl, and after a brief debate on whether I should do it, I told her that I had to get home and could not give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again. My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Could you give me a ride? This time I felt more confident when I declined to give her a ride and told her I had a curfew and had to get home. She leaned in a third time and began her statement again. My boyfriend beat me. At this point the light changed. I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light, then looked down at me, leaned in closer and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since. You made the right decision. Then she picked up her bag and walked back towards the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do, or if there were people waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. But that encounter has haunted me ever since, and has confirmed in my mind that nothing good happens after dark. The few people that I've told this story always laugh it off or tease me, but I swear on my life that it's true. I have always loved yard sales. In the summer, when I have a free day, I'll often just drive around all day looking for different yard sales, wasting my day away. About 2 years ago, I was doing this, just driving around looking for yard sale signs, gradually going further out into the rural country and enjoying the scenery, having fun getting lost on the backcountry roads. You can sometimes find great yard sales doing this. I saw a yard sale sign off the road, next to a big rock with something religious carved into it like churches have. I can't for the life of me remember what it said. God's Haven? Something religious, I can't remember. Anyways, I figure it's probably got some good stuff if it's a church organisation, so I decide to go. I turn my new Jeep down the long, narrow gravel driveway, and the trees open up to a clearing with a really beautiful white house. They have long tables spread out with folded clothes, kids' toys, etc., but nothing I was really interested in. There are probably 30 people milling about on the property, but they are all wearing these grey jumpsuits. Okay. The only other person that seems to be browsing through their wares was this old man, whose truck was also parked there, but we were the only ones, save for grey jumpsuits. The woman at the makeshift table with the money box on it begins talking to me as I'm preparing to leave. I stride over to her for a friendly chat, and I notice that behind the house, there are probably 10 or so small grey buildings the grey jumpsuits are going in and out of. After some casual chat, she notices me staring. Yes, we all live here, it's great. Hey, would you like to come in and learn more? She had this crazy light in her eyes, and I attempted to mumble an excuse when she nodded at 3 guys who had been arranging stuff on the tables, moving tables, etc., and they all came to stand around me. Really, come inside, we preach peace and the word of God, you'd really like it. She took my hand and kind of started tugging me towards the house. All the while these guys are following me and are making weak protests. Then the old man, who'd been browsing paperbacks, seems to notice and comes up. He looks at the woman and says, "Sorry ma'am, we both really gotta be going. I don't think she's interested." The woman looks shocked, but lets go, and the guys step back. He's a scrawny old guy, and I'm a petite woman, but that brave old man grabs my arm and hustles me over to my Jeep. As I'm thanking him and yelling back to the people to have good luck with their yard sale, he mutters in a low voice, "You really need to get out of here." My hands are shaking, all the grey jumpsuits are just turned and silently staring at us, and I'm fumbling with my keys. The old man stands by my rolled down window, and I fumble to start the car and try to back out of the narrow gravel driveway. I try to do a 3-point turn, but my car slides down in the gravel into a shallow ditch next to the driveway and I'm panicking. "Just take it easy. Put it in 4-wheel drive," he coaxes. "I don't know how," I whisper frantically. I'd only had the Jeep for a couple months at that point, and I had never had a car with 4-wheel drive before. I figured I'd learn eventually. He calmly told me how to do it, and stood there guiding me as I finally got the Jeep to stop sinking into the gravel and drove the hell out of there. I yelled a thank you to him and he nodded before getting into his truck. I told my family and a few friends who kind of laughed and brushed it off, saying they hadn't heard of any cults in this area, probably just a church sale at one of the members' houses. I've driven around that area a little bit after the event, but haven't seen that rock sign thing again. Though honestly, that day I drove pretty deep into rural country, had no idea what road or where I was. I just knew the general direction to drive in to get back to a main road and eventually find my way home. I think I may have escaped a cult that is kind of off the radar, but I swear to God it happened, and thank God that old man helped me get out of there.
Would you run? Would you fight? Or would you be frozen in place, devoured by fear? Imagine yourself in these specific scenarios. How will your instincts make you act? Write your answer in the comment section below. Were you captivated by these stories? Consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell if your curiosity craves to hear more true, chilling reports recovered from the dark road. If you have a personal true story you'd like to share, please send it to the email address in the description.